audience here, and I've got to watch these two especially because they'll pick me up if anything I do wrong. Good afternoon. I hope I hope it's worth you staying because it's been a long day and it's really nice to be here. I look at my badge and I notice that they spelt my name wrong. I've only been involved in the CMA for 40 years. They still got my name wrong. Anyway, so here we no. At some point there'll be a There we are. So this is me, and I teach at the University of Bedfordshire, where we run Radiolab. I'm also at the moment doing some work for WorldDAB on rolling out the success of small-scale DAB in the UK to the wider world. And as a part-time hobby, I run the multiplex in Norwich. So let's quickly run through the development of small-scale DAB, and it's really quick. If you didn't know it, actually we have the Canadians to thank for small-scale DAB because they started to look at it about 15 years ago. There were then some technical trials here in the UK in 2012, and then there were some experimental licenses, and I was one of the license holders with Future Digital Norfolk in Norwich, and I was told it's a 6-month license. It actually ended up being a 5.5-year license, so their timing was a little optimistic. Licensing started in 2018, and there have been 4 licensing rounds run so far, with the 5th currently ongoing. 3 of those licensing rounds have been completed, and the 5th round is due to be awarded next year. There's a couple of awards already been made, but they were kind of hangovers from earlier rounds. And there's more to come after that. We've had, believe it or not, some 80 multiplexes already licensed in the first 3 rounds. About 40 of these, and Dave told me that I was being pessimistic, it's more than 40 now, are now on air. And the key point here, and this is where we get to the serious business, the key point is it's effectively changed from a seller's market to a buyer's market. When there were just 15 small-scale DAB trial muxes operating around the country, there was a huge demand from groups, community groups and others that wanted to be on these multiplexes. And so all 15 were pretty much full. And that meant that even for a not-for-profit organisation like ours, we were able to make money and plough it into our community radio station, Future Radio in Norwich. A lot of the new multiplexes are not very full. And it's a challenge because just like running an FM station, running a DAB multiplex is not cheap. There are a lot of elements that go into it, not least things like the transmitter rental, the capital equipment, the maintenance of that equipment, the liaison with the client stations. It's not an easy job. And it's made more difficult if there isn't a sufficient number of stations to keep your turnover up and keep your head above water. So there are viability issues. But there are also some technical issues. One of the things about small-scale DAB is that it tries to solve a problem of capacity, but it can only do that within the resources that are available in terms of frequencies. And when you start to get to 80, 120, 150 small-scale multiplexes, you do again start to run out of space. So some multiplexes are going to find that their coverage is not as good as they might like it to be. And that's partly, as I say, a function of frequencies, but it's also a function of what you can invest in terms of developing the coverage that you want to do. The international impacts, and now I'm going to come to questions after that, the international impacts are actually, it has been overall a success story. There are a large number of community organisations that are now on air that couldn't have been on air before because there was simply no FM frequencies available. It definitely isn't a panacea. There's lots of things about it which you might say we could do in a slightly different way, and it doesn't solve the entire resource problem, but it does mean that a lot of stations, particularly communities of interest, if you take Angel Radio, for example, Angel Radio serves a population of retired and older people, and it's just pretty universal across the country. On a community radio license, it can only do that in 1 or 2 locations across the country. On DAB, it can reach out to a much, much larger population. So what are the future developments? Scale, expansion, but challenges in terms of the finances. I had a really good test session earlier on because someone came up to me and talked about the specific requirements that they had in their local area. But that quick canter through, you can see the fast pace of growth. It's much faster, for example, than the pace of expansion of FM community radio from the mid-2000s onwards. And that to get to 300 stations took something like just about 10 or 12 years. This has gone from 0 to 80 multiplexes, and if a multiplex carries an average of 10 stations, that's a big growth in a very short space of time. So I'm open to questions and possibly heckling. It's so late in the day. Be nice to me, Dave.
I'm not going to be a horrible Lawrie at all. We are, I've changed my name now, Dave. I'm all right, I don't know who I am. We are part of the Cheshire East, or is it East Cheshire DAB? And I have to be honest, you know that everybody in the room knows this. I was kind of dragged kicking and screaming. I still believe it's got a short shelf life, personally. I think it's a white elephant, but it is something that I think people have to have a go at just for now. It launches on this week sometime. However, they had interest from 17 or 18 groups who were going to come on it. It launches next week with 4. And then, of course, the 4 of us who will go on, although we won't be going on at the moment because we can't afford it, and we're part of it. It's a bit shambolic, I think, and the rules as well got changed right at the beginning. The Hungry Hippos have come poking their oar in on this. That's not how it was sold to us right at the outset. And we've ended up, I think, with a bad deal again.
I think you actually make some very good points there. I think if you look at the way small-scale DAB has developed since it started, one of the issues is that I think there was a lack of awareness of the costs involved. If you look at the 2 multiplexes which recently closed, I would suggest to you that the primary reason that happened was that the site costs were very high. Now, why, you might say, would an operator go for a high site cost approach? Part of that is down to the legislation, which says you get the license and you've got to be on within 18 months. I can tell you from personal experience, and others in this room will know this, negotiating site access and getting onto a transmitter site is a very convoluted and sometimes very long-winded process. The reason we have that 18-month cut-off point is because other people involved in DAB prior to small-scale DAB would be awarded licenses, and 6-7 years down the road, they hadn't launched the services. So it was felt that there needed to be a pressure put upon the licensees to get these things on air. And the fact that we've got 40 multiplexes on in under 4 years, in about 4 years, is a pretty good indication that that works, but there is a price to pay for it. The other thing is, and I hesitate to say this, but I will, I think some multiplex operators are overly optimistic in what they think they can charge. And if you think about it, you can potentially have 20, 22, 23 stations on a multiplex. And indeed, in the big urban conurbations, you will get that because it's a big population and people will deem that worth serving. But actually, if you're trying to charge all of them quite a substantial fee, well above your operating costs because you're operating on a commercial basis, some of them may decide not to go on. We took a decision back in 2015 that we would rather have relatively low levels of income from stations that will be with us for the long term, rather than sell things at quite a high cost, find that people then can't support it and can't pay it, and then end up going off, and then you've got to find another station. That's no good for us as a business, it's hard work, but equally, it's no good for the audience. The audience wants to know that if Angel Radio or Radio Caroline or Future Radio are on in Norwich, they're on it for the long term. They don't want to wake up one morning and find some other station on and that one disappeared. But if you try to oversell, and I think that's maybe what's happening, is a lot of people don't do it, and then the burden comes back to you as the remaining stations having to pay more in order to cover the costs. Yeah, and I think that, it's a balance. There's a learning curve going on here. People are looking at their overheads, their capital costs, their total cost of ownership. What's it costing them to run these over a long period of time? What are the costs in terms of capital, site rental, connectivity, maintenance, insurance, all the rest of those things. And then they've got to do a calculation of, well, how much capacity have we got? How do we chop that cake up? And what do we charge per slice? And I'm not sure that people have really quite figured that out yet. But I am happy if anyone wants to ask me questions about the practicalities, I'm happy to give you some answers on that as well. It would be right at the back. Hello.
Yeah, I'm Rob Pisani from Rutland and Stamford Sound.
Hi, Rob.
We actually don't have a sharing for our area. We did look at it, but we didn't think it was viable, either operationally or financially. So actually it has been won. It's got 6 months still to launch. It's on 3 sites. It's about 60,000 population. It's got about maybe 3-4 services interested. We're one of them. We just are desperate to get on. We're an online station that's been going on for 2.5 years, and we want to really get on FM, to be perfectly honest. But we can't at the moment. So I just wondered, really, in terms of your experience of running it and energy costs, having obviously increased majorly, this isn't a very easy technology to power cheaply, it seems.
Okay, I'm not probably the best person to answer this question because the deals we negotiated with local council and site owners are such that we're not actually paying anything that directly correlates to the energy costs. But you're looking at a transmitter, let's say you're radiating 200 watts, well, you can probably actually have a transmitter running at about 100 watts and then put some gain into the antenna. So you're looking at 100 watts, someone get their calculator out, 100 watts, so that's over 24 hours, over 365 days a year. Work out your cost per kilowatt hour, so divide that by 10 and you've got your figure. It isn't cheap, but actually it's about akin to FM, broadly speaking. And the difference is that on DAB, you're splitting that across potentially 20 stations. You certainly should be splitting it across 4, 5, or 6. So actually, one of the things, and the BBC did some really good work on this about, I think, 2.5 years ago, where they actually looked at the total energy consumption costs per listener across AM, FM, online, and DAB. And DAB does very, very well simply on that basis that it's a one-to-many system, so you've not got all these bi-directional links like you've got in a mobile phone system, but you're splitting those costs of the wattage that you're radiating across multiple stations. It is worth perhaps teasing something else out there as well, which is thinking about the relationship between a community radio station and a multiplex operator. Some community radio stations have decided that they want to be a multiplex operator, and I've absolutely no problem with that. The legislation doesn't require that you're commercial or not-for-profit. I would hope that the community sector would err towards being not-for-profit. We took a decision, and this might be something some people might like to think about, we took a decision that the community radio station needed to be protected from us screwing up with the DAB, and likewise that if the community radio station were to hit problems, at least we would be able to provide the other services, which includes some other community-based services, were it to be separate. So the radio station in Norwich is a charity. The multiplex operator is a company limited by guarantee, and when we make a surplus, that surplus is ploughed back into the radio station. The other advantage is that we don't have to discuss with the community radio station which other stations are going on the multiplex. You can imagine that there might, in some cases, be rivalry between the operation of the individual station that owns the multiplex and some other service wanting to come on that may perhaps challenge them in some way or another, and we have seen some examples of that. So keeping that separate and saying, right, okay, We've got a separate community radio company and a separate multiplex operator, protects both from each other, and gives you the operational flexibility within the terms of the DAB operations. And I'm glad it's the end of the day, and it's lovely to see you all. Thanks very much.